Okay, great. Now that the rumor site has posted up pictures from a source in Japan on the X-T4, let's talk about some facts on the Fujifilm X-T4 and just a couple speculations. By the way, everybody loves to mention one video where I made a mistake, and that was on the integrated vertical grip. However, about 4 days ago, I corrected myself on that, and I said I made a mistake, but everybody seemed to have forgotten that I posted a correction about 4 days ago. And the mistake that I made was that the lithium ion density has drastically increased since like the days of the large batteries for the Nikon D4 and Nikon D5. Let's first start off. By the way, one thing I absolutely got right since day one on the X-T4 is that the X-T4 is basically, and including many other things, is an X-T3 on steroids with a really deep buffer, and it's going to be hardcore for the Olympics. I mean, as good as the X-T3 is, actually X-T3 is great. And by the way, the X-T3 just got a firmware update. Everybody keeps reading the comments on the Fuji Rumors website, and everybody says, oh my god, I hope it has better eye autofocus than the X-T3 did. Well, the X-T3 just got a huge firmware update that drastically increased, and everybody that tested it, including myself, reports the same thing. Greatly improved autofocus tracking, but specifically eye autofocus. So the X-T3 already has superior eye autofocus. One thing nobody knows on the X-T4, other than the folks in Japan at Fuji, is what sort of processor update has been applied for even greater improvement or processing of data. But let's actually talk about the battery and the specifications on the Fujifilm X-T4. And by the way, you could actually see the images over there on their website. The battery on the X-T4 is 2,350 milliamps, and it looks 100% identical, literally 100% identical to an EN-EL15 Nikon battery. This is a 1900 milliamp battery, but it's an old battery, and even Nikon actually updated that battery a couple years ago. But it's exactly like this. It has the exact same bumps on the back side of the battery. And here's a current Fujifilm battery. It doesn't matter whether it's the S version or not. They're both the same size. So the new updated X-T4 battery is about 20% larger, top to bottom, roughly so. And in thickness, it's also about 20% larger. So, I mean, it's not that drastically bigger, but we're actually talking about like a 126S battery of 1,280 milliamps. That would be 2,350, almost a doubling. Essentially a doubling, 2,350 milliamps, almost essentially a doubling. Now, I don't know if the detachable vertical grip on the X-T4, yes, it has a detachable vertical grip. Obviously, it's going to look different. However, I don't know if it's going to have two removable batteries like this size, or one. But if it has two, including the battery up in the camera, that means in the X-T4, with nearly, essentially, the double the capacity on the 2,350 milliamps, that means if you have three batteries in the camera with a vertical grip, that's basically 6 times the power as what you would have in an X-T3 with its 3 batteries, 1 in the camera and 2 in the vertical grip. Essentially, yeah. So instead of like 3 batteries, I said 6 times, I meant double, of course. I mean, that's like having, in the X-T4 with the increased battery, that's basically like having 6 of these in the camera and the vertical grip. The X-T4 has IBIS. The one thing I don't know, and nobody knows except for the folks in Japan, is that the shutter mech, if it's on a 5-point spring suspension, like it is on the X-H1, which is really great, because if you have the X-H1 like I do, it is extremely soft, which makes for no flash photography indoor when you want to keep things really quiet. The shutter mech is really silent, so I don't know if it actually has that 5-point spring suspension. So it has IBIS, it has a fully articulating screen. There's also a large convex autofocus on button right to the right side of the viewfinder. It's about 5 to 6 millimeters thicker than the X-T3. That's necessitated because you actually have to do that to increase, jam the IBIS mech in there. And also make way for a battery compartment, to hold this battery. I was surprised that the battery looks exactly 100% identical to the EN-EL15 Nikon battery. Dual SD card slots, greatly increased buffer over that of the X-T3. If you actually look at the images, which I'm looking at now, there's a thumb cut out on the back. You know, there's no tab on the left side of the camera like there is on an XT2, XT3 for pulling out the display, you know, and then pulling it out like an XT3. There's a thumb cut out in the back, which necessitated the movement of the D-pad further to the right, so there's a thumb cut out there. Also, too, the sub-dial is changed where the photometry dial is underneath the ISO dial. It says stills and then movie. You could barely make out movie. On the sub-dial, and there still is, of course, a compensation wheel. It basically looks like a thicker version of the XT3. Over where there's a single on the sub-dial on the left, where it says single, continuous low, continuous high, right to the right of single, there is HDR. Yeah, that's substantial. Oh, very important. Yeah, the main point I wanted to point out in this video is that the four things that people were complaining, if you will, about since the XT2 and the XT3 have been added to this camera. That's a really important point. Let's go over the four things that people wanted, you know, are complaining about. Why doesn't it have this? Now it has it. IBIS number 1. Larger battery. Number 2. A fully articulating screen, number 3, and number 4, an autofocus on button. Because even on the XT3, which I should have brought my XT3 out here, all the buttons are flat. If you wanted to assign one of the buttons to AF on, it's still flat, flush button. And people are like, you know, when you have your eye up to the display, the EVF, you can't feel that. I mean, muscle memory should actually dictate where it's at, and I actually have no issue doing that. I don't actually use AF on my Fujifilms, I do on my Nikons. But now there's a bump, you know, a nice convex bump on the back to the right of the viewfinder on the XT4. Also, too, you could actually see on the frontispiece, looking at the front of the XT4, that it's much broader and more blocky with harder lines, but it's much broader in the EVF bump viewfinder area on the XT4. You can see the larger battery compartment too on the XT4. But those are the four main things. And what we don't know is the 5-point spring suspension on the shutter mech. If they add that, that'll be killer. There is no doubt that Fujifilm's going to come out with the X-H2. I guess they're going to announce it later this year, but the Fuji Rumors guy was right on his source that it's not going to come out this year. But just think about it. I know for a fact, too, because I could tell by the design of this, when it's the same powder coating, I know 100% for a fact that this is assembled in China, the same as the XT3. That's not a problem. It's good news. That means that the camera is going to be less than $1,700. It could be the exact same price as the Fujifilm XT3 when it was released, but that really is probably pretty impossible. Oh, yeah, by the way, yeah, duh. It's the exact same sensor as the XT3. Yes, the XT4 is a very important point. I'm sorry I should have mentioned it earlier. The XT4 is the exact same sensor in the XT3, but people, when they don't like hearing that, they really, really forget that a camera is not a frigging sensor. For example, Nikon D610, same damn sensor in the Nikon D610 is found in the Nikon D750. Radically different performance on noise and output. It's because a camera is not a frigging sensor. The actual AD converters and the actual image processing, both on the sensor chip assembly, let's call it the sensor subassembly is what they call it, and processing on the main board can be radically different. For example, Nikon D700 and Nikon D3 are the same sensor. I have these cameras. I've owned many of them. D700 looks way better than the Nikon D3 output straight out of camera. So when people say, oh, damn, it's the same sensor in the XT4s and the XT3, damn, don't get your panties in a wad. That doesn't mean anything. That also keeps the cost radically down. They probably offset the cost of the increase of the IBIS mech. Also, too, there's no new sensor out there. Also, getting pixel density tighter than 26 megapixel on a crop sensor is not really a good idea anyway, not without radically new sensor technology. It's already a BSI sensor, for God's sakes. So yes, it's the same sensor in the XT4. So, and on the assembly, since it's assembled in China, people fail to realize, just as they have an XT3, my XT2 is made in Japan, I don't know about this XT3 made in China. Well, it's not made there, it's assembled there to keep ultimate costs down. The sensors are coming from the same place that they always were. So is the shutter mech, so is the main board, so is the EVF. Assembled in does not mean made in. Those are two different things that everybody gets really confused over. Assembled in versus made in. But the four things that people have been asking for is in the XT4. Imagine an XT4, basically the same price as an XT3, or somewhere right around there, with IBIS, which this has, with a fully articulating screen, which this has, with an AF on button, which this has, with a larger battery, which this has. This is going to be a slightly thicker XT3 on steroids, i.e. the XT4, that everybody's been clamoring over. And yes, this is absolutely going to be a hardcore sports action. Not that the XT3 isn't. I mean, the XT3, you can sit there, stick the fastest SD cards in the XT3 and pound the shutter, and you could really get off a string of shots. But this is going to be way better. So, and the XT3 is good enough, but I mean, the people that are, you know, when they're capturing action in every microsecond counts. Someone's like, why don't you need to do, like in bright sunlight, you know, 20 frames per second electronic shutter, and then like nail that for like 10 seconds nonstop. Just, you know, you're just ripping them off, you know, like a machine gun. It's like, you know, I've done hardcore, not recently, but people don't realize that every microsecond counts. Like the difference between 1 microsecond and another, you know, that loss means losing the entire shot. And so that's actually really important, and that's definitely why Fujifilm is going to showcase this camera with another huge prime in addition to the 200mm f2 at the Olympics. So that's good news. That's good news. Those are the things people asked for. Yeah, same sensor as XT3, but it could have radically different output, just like Nikon D3 versus D700, just like Nikon D610 versus D750, both using the same damn sensors. Both groups of those were using the same damn sensors. And so there is I don't know if they use the same casing as the Nikon battery, you know, and it basically also kind of looks like the Nikon battery looks almost identical to the Sony battery, and so the new Fujifilm X-T4 looks exactly like the Nikon and the Sony battery, but you can see the difference in size there. About 20% thickness and 20% height difference. Let me make them even right there, yeah? It looks exactly like this. Exactly. Yeah. But a lot of people failed to see my video from 4 days ago where I acknowledged a mistake from the prior 4 days to that, saying, oh, you know, I made a mistake. Even though it's 2,350 milliamps, lithium-ion battery density is increased radically, you know, since the days of the Nikon D5 even. Which means you're able to cram more milliamps into a smaller battery. But still, yeah, with 3 of these in an X, just think about that, really. With 3 of these in an XT4 compared to an XT3 right beside of it with 3 batteries, you know, that's basically like 6 of these. So the XT4, I don't know if it has 2 of these or 1 of these in the vertical grip, pure speculation, but if it has 2, that would be like 6 of these suckers inside of the XT4. Essentially, power-wise, not size-wise, obviously, power-wise. That's very substantial, as we would say. Anyway, the one thing I speculated on in this video, 2 things I speculated on in this video, the rest are fact. Well, 3 things I speculated on. One was price. I speculated on price. Number 2 thing I speculated on was 5-point spring suspension on the shutter mech, and the 3rd thing I speculated on whether it's going to have 2 of these. I guess it should have 2. There's room enough for 2 of these. 2 of these or 1 of these in the vertical grip, detachable vertical grip, because you could even see the pin-out contacts on the XT4. There's a little rubber plate there, just like there is in the XT2, XT3 for, you know, screwing in a vertical grip. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you liked this video. And peace out, Girl Scout. And wait for it. Whoops. I'm so sorry. Wait for it. Fujifilm.